believe it's episode 10? Yes, episode 10 of the Radio Times Podcast Poldark special. I am, of course, Sarah Doran.
I'm Susanna Lazarus. I also can't believe it.
Can you? We have been here talking about Poldark for almost 10 weeks straight.
And I mean, for literally 10 weeks straight.
Literally 10 weeks straight. And we can finally talk about what just happened in that finale, because we were trying so hard not to say anything. Now we don't have to be spoiler free because it's all out there. You've seen it all. You've watched it all.
And in the words of Janice from Friends, oh my God.
See, I can't even let Susanna do her own impressions. I'll have to talk across her when she's trying to do them. Susanna, take us through what we've just watched.
Jeez, I mean, wow. I feel like I had a little heads up this might happen.
Yeah.
Someone in my office referred to it as a pity shag, which I think is quite an accurate description.
It is quite true.
I think, I mean, Demelza, actually no, I'm not going to say poor Ross, because Ross was a silly.
Oh, completely.
He was silly. He didn't give her the attention that was due, and Hugh swanned in and was all poetic, compared her to the Mona Lisa. I mean, for me, I don't think that quite did it for me, but for her it clearly did. Yeah. I think she was wooed, wasn't she?
Completely, and I think she was completely justified. We actually don't know whether she did or she didn't. That's the thing. It's only hinted at.
As ever with Poldark, ambiguous,
yeah, because as Susanna mentioned, Ross strolls off into those dunes and he has a look around and he can't see anything.
No, I mean, there was the moment where I did think, is he going to stumble across them?
I was kind of like, please no, I don't want to see anything.
Lying naked in the,
I was kind of thinking,
in the marram grass.
You know when you see in those kind of period dramas of just like thrusting pieces of anatomy in like marram grass?
Not
or
Poldark, surely.
No. The only thing's thrusting
in
Poldark.
The
only things thrusting in Poldark are like, the spears and the swords and the boats on the high seas, the waves.
But still, I mean, you saw them definitely getting together. You saw them kneeling down lustfully in the dunes. You didn't see much else. I mean, at the very least, Demelza went for a very long walk because, as we saw, she wasn't there when Ross went looking for her. She definitely came back pretty late in the evening.
Yeah. She's
clearly torn and kind of upset by what's happened. Did she go the whole way? Who knows? Maybe we'll never know. Maybe we'll find out. But yeah, quite a turnout for the books. And actually, it's worth pointing out that there's an interview with Eleanor Tomlinson and Debbie Horsfield in the edition of Radio Times, more recent edition of Radio Times, where they talk about the fact that it definitely isn't just revenge. It's not revenge for what happened between Ross and Elizabeth. It's more than that. And I do think that was kind of played out. She definitely had a connection with Hugh. It definitely didn't come from a place of anger towards Ross's infidelity.
No. It kind of came more from Ross, we just don't talk to each other. And then here was somebody who did talk to her, who did make her kind of feel more valued in a way Ross maybe used to, but hasn't in a little while. And I think that kind of made it very understandable what she did. Whereas, like, say, I know some people, when Ross gave Elizabeth that kiss on the head in the church, were kind of like, oh, for God's sake, Ross. Even though it was like, kind of a calming kind of, this is over between us kind of thing. As well with Demelza, it seemed less like that. It seemed a little bit more kind of, oh no, I can kind of get why you did that.
Also, it came from a place of compassion, didn't it? Because here's this man who's going blind.
Yeah.
He wants, he say something like a taste of heaven beforehand. And the pity shag.
Yeah, I mean, has he never seen it before? Clearly not.
Meanwhile, obviously you had Ross doing his thing, training up his local guard, and actually coming pretty close to a very bloodshed-heavy standoff.
The return of the dream sequence.
Yes, I know. We've been talking about this, actually. I mean, I feel like the dream sequence has had a lot of use in this series.
Completely.
That, this happened. Oh, no, wait, actually it didn't. But I will say, in both cases, the Elizabeth in the church, and then here when Ross was standing off against Tholly and Sam, I thought it was a tool that was used very effectively.
Well, particularly in the standoff, because I kind of knew in my head that, like, Sam would survive. I kind of had a feeling like that. He's not going to kill his wife's brother. But when I did see, like, the flash of, the guns hitting Tholly, I kind of thought, hold on, is this going to happen? Like, there was a bit of me that was genuinely concerned.
You're kind of watching it thinking, surely not.
Yeah, but then you think TV can do anything. It doesn't have to conform to what happens in a book. And we should mention, by the way, that for all the stuff we're talking about, if you want to know more, you can look at the books, but we are sticking specifically to the TV series.
Also, I mean, we come from a place of naivety. I've purposely not read the Poldark books because I don't want to know.
Yeah.
I think you're the same, aren't you?
Yeah,
so it's not like if we accidentally spoil something, it's not purposeful. I mean, we really don't know what's coming.
We have not read the books, but we love our listeners who have, and often leave us some very helpful, handy tips.
Yes.
From the standoff, during that standoff, Ross, of course, kind of came to a moment of epiphany.
Finally,
like how much was it going to take? I mean, Tom Harry roughing up Drake. How hard was that? First of all, that was terrifying.
Also, just kind of storing up grain, hiking prices, nasty George. I feel like it was about time, wasn't it?
Yeah, and he finally snapped and said he will go to Parliament.
Indeed.
A more serious storyline that we saw really come to a head was Morwenna and Osborne, and of course Morwenna finally stood up to him in a really quite harrowing scene, and then we learned that her sister is pregnant with the Reverend's baby. I did think it was quite interesting in that when she was coming back and forth with the guy from the library who had kind of offered himself to be the surrogate father, essentially, or the adoptive father for the child, it quite mirrored that sequence earlier in the series when Osborne was coming back and forth to George, looking to kind of get a higher price to marry, I was going to call her Morwenna, and make George a Godolphin. So I thought it was quite interesting to see those kind of two scenes. The bartering kind of played out this time against Osborne, but quite dark, the whole thing, really.
I know, especially that scene with Morwenna where she's trying to kind of protect herself from her evil husband. Her sister who, like you said, I mean, I kind of thought, originally I thought she was just trying to kind of divert Osborne's attention. The fact that she's used it to blackmail him, presumably really anger him and get a load of money out of him. I'm not sure how well that's going to play back on Morwenna. Is she going to feel the wrath of her sister's betrayal?
And there is that letter to the bishop that Rowella wrote that we know was in Osborne's possession. I mean, could that return?
I mean, there was a little part of me that thought, it's not like it's the only evidence you have.
Yes.
You could just write another letter. He's essentially paid a lot of money for a draft.
But perhaps that's a question for another series. Another kind of, I'm not sure if it was a deception or very much the truth, and I think the wording of it is particularly interesting, was Elizabeth's swearing to George.
That was a dramatic scene, wasn't it? It was nice to finally see some passion from her.
Yeah,
and I feel like she's been pretty cold and haughty and resigned.
And to see him break down, essentially, because we've seen him be a man on the edge, I think, quite a lot this series. We've seen his frustration, but he's consistently bottled it back up and turned it into this absolute nastiness. So to see him actually cry and properly break down, for me, I think I mentioned this in last week's episode when I said I almost felt sorry for him. I almost did.
I think it just reminds you of the fact that he adores her, holds her on a pedestal. I mean, she has essentially not used him as a mug, but she's used him to get herself out of a very tricky situation. I wouldn't go as far as saying I feel sorry for him, because then there was that very frosty conversation on the beach with Ross where he says, I have belief in my wife, and just feeling very smug about how life is going for him at the moment. But I thought it was a good scene. I thought, like you said, the wording was interesting. When Elizabeth comes and she has the Bible in her hand and she's swearing that nothing happened, she says the words, I have never given myself to another man except my first husband Francis and you. And it's that wording, like giving yourself to another man. I mean, technically you could say that she's not exactly lying, because she didn't really give herself to Ross, he took. I thought that was an interesting, maybe that's how she's kind of justifying it within herself.
Well, I mean, at the time of that scene, which I suppose everybody remembers from the last series, they always said that it was left ambiguous, and I think by wording it this way, they're sticking with that line, as in they're still leaving that degree of ambiguity. Elizabeth's not saying, Ross took me, but she's not saying he didn't take her either. She's just saying that she is only kind of willingly given herself to it. So it's interesting to see the way that's worded.
And we should say that obviously it was a very dramatic event for the series finale. There is actually an interview that Debbie Horsfield has done with Ben Dow, one of our RadioTimes.com journalists, that is on the Radio Times website now. She kind of hashes over all the events of the series finale, looks a little bit ahead. I definitely recommend going and having a read of it.
And we will include a link to it, of course, in the podcast description as well for anybody who wants to do that. Debbie's fantastic interview aside, we have decided to do our own little look ahead, because you might remember we started out the podcast with a preview of Series 3, and we're going to attempt to do our own kind of preview of Series 4 with our 5 big questions about what's going to happen in Poldark Series 4. So I think, going off that final scene, the first thing we have to say is, what does the future hold for Ross and Demelza?
I mean, they've really, where do you go from here? One's cheated on one, the other one's cheated on back, It's not exactly, if you're talking about trust in a relationship, I'm not really sure where the trust is here.
No, they're both in a very fragile place, I think.
Absolutely. I don't think we've ever really seen their relationship in a place more fragile than this.
No.
Yeah, I'm not really sure where you go from here. I mean, there's that quite tender moment at the very end where he sort of takes her in his arms, and it suggests that maybe all is not lost. But at the same time, I don't understand how you move on without knowing exactly what happened. And it seemed to me like they were never really going to talk about it.
No, I don't know that the discussion will ever happen. And I wonder what that will mean for them, in that communication has always been basically their downfall. A lack of it, being their downfall. In that scene in the last episode, we saw Demelza say, "Oh, you keep your secrets, Ross, and I'll keep mine then." And I don't think that necessarily hints at a very positive outcome. But then again, this is Poldark. Anything can happen. Have they been through worse?
I mean, you also have to remind yourself that Poldark is founded on pretty much this relationship.
Exactly.
Obviously, one could presume that this relationship will not crumble, but it'll be interesting to see how you come back from this, because Demelza especially has always been the more virtuous one of the two, the one who was kind of pure and innocent. And yeah, I think that's all changed, hasn't it? Will it change how Ross sees her? Does it change how she feels towards him? Is she regretting what she's done? What exactly did she do?
Yeah, and I think a lot might hinge on whether or not we see Hugh Armitage again, because of course, I could say infidelity, but we don't know how much of an infidelity it was, but say sins of the past are often kind of reinforced with the presence of the person you committed said sin with, or possibly committed said sin with. So if Hugh Armitage is still around, will that be a reminder for Ross? Will there be a conflict there with Lord Falmouth? But we don't know.
And I mean, the drama will do what the drama does,
exactly,
whether they want to include him or not. But it seems a little inconceivable that this man who has been discharged from the army is sitting around in Cornwall with a lot of time on his hands, is a relative of someone who the Poldarks come into contact with quite a lot. Surely we're going to see him again. You'd think we would.
You'd think so too. It could be very interesting in relation to question 2 as well, because we know Ross has now mentioned that if he's given the chance to challenge George in the halls of Parliament again, he probably will. So what will Ross get up to in London?
Is question number 2. Yeah,
exactly.
I think I'm intrigued. I think it does definitely... Well, okay, so if you, again, read the Alan Tomlinson and Debbie Horsfield piece in this week's Radio Times, we know that he's going to London next series. That will presumably form a large basis of the action. Will he... I'm guessing he'll be an MP. If he is an MP, will he take George's seat? Will he have a seat of his own? How will he fare? And are we just going to see, a lot of action in London? Is it going to be split between London and Cornwall? What will happen to Demelza? So many questions, Sarah.
So many questions. But this still is only question 2, just for your information. Sub-questions. And I think as well, based on how... kind of remember his stubbornness being his downfall, I think, is what Sir Francis Bassett said. How will that stubbornness translate to the halls of Parliament? Will we see Ross getting into fisticuffs with MPs if he is an MP? Will he be put out by the Speaker of the House, for being unparliamentary behaviour, that kind of thing. So I'm quite curious to see.
We should mention that I think Sir Francis Bassett is a real life person. So, for any clues as to what... I don't know necessarily if Ross will team up with him or not, but if he does, if we want clues for what might happen, maybe worth having a little Google of Sir Francis and seeing. I feel like he's inevitably got to be some sort of force for good, Ross. Yeah. And actually, I think in the series finale, you saw him overcome some of the stubbornness that has really hindered him in the past. Whether he can keep that up is another question.
I think another thing as well that will be interesting for him is how will he contend with his wife? Because I think Eleanor Tomlinson mentions in another interview in Radio Times with Alison Graham that Demelza becomes nearly as much of a head of a household, essentially, for Nampara as Ross heads off to London. And we're not sure how Ross will handle that. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic to see.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like in the last series he's kind of compromised a little bit on that. He's obviously got this very headstrong, awesome wife who wants to take a lead in a time when it's not really socially done. But having said that, he's acknowledged her in the past, when I'm not here, you make decisions. Yeah. I accept that. I respect that. I hope that continues. I'm all for the girl power in Poldark.
Yes.
The important question is, though, I was going to ask you, would you vote for Ross? MP Ross?
I don't know. I guess, do you know what? He'd probably by complete accident have convinced me that he's the perfect leader, because Ross just walks into situations where he becomes the perfect leader. I have interviewed Aidan a few times. He's a nice bloke. So would I vote for Aidan Turner's Ross Poldark? Possibly. Maybe I'd be biased from the home country. Would I vote for Ross Poldark, the character? Do you know what? If I was faced with a choice between him and George, I probably would.
What about you? I bet he's done more dirty things than running through fields of wheat.
Definitely. He's cut them down with a scythe. He did it topless.
Ross won Theresa May nail.
Exactly.
I think I'd vote for Ross.
Yeah.
I think I would. I think he'd give a rousing speech that would probably convince me.
Completely. Or just take his top off. No, that's not why you should vote for somebody. Vote for them on their political morals, not their pecs. Anyway, moving on to a slightly more serious question. Can Drake and Morwenna find their happy ending?
Question number 3. Yeah, I think this is interesting because obviously their partnership was reintroduced at the end of this series, and that kind of last really quite moving scene where he finds winter primroses.
Primroses, not posies.
Finds winter primroses, leaves them for her, and she says, "Know that I love you," and he hears, and his little face. I feel like his near-death experience might give him a new lease of life, a new kind of sense of purpose. Who knows quite how he could ever win her back, because she's married and she's married to a monster, but I feel like that scene was almost teasing us with what might happen next. And the storyline is not over.
I think, like we've seen with Rowella and her new suitor from the library, who's happy to take on another man's child, I think if there was anything Drake would do for Morwenna, I feel like he would take on the baby as well if he had to, but whether that will be a situation they ever find themselves in is another question. I don't see, unless something massive happens, how she's going to get away from Osborne at this point in time, so it'll be quite interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, he's a rather nasty obstacle, isn't he? I think that's a noise that's very appropriate. I was scrolling through, the other day on the internet, and someone mentioned that they Googled him pre-weight gain, because as he said to Radio Times before, he kind of put on 2 stone to play this role. So I was Googling and trying to see what skinny Christian Brassington looked like, and I just stumbled across a screen grab of the toe sucking. I think made a similar sort of noise to the one you just made and clicked out immediately.
Well, he was at Wimbledon with David Tennant, but nobody recognised him. So when David Tennant was at the Wimbledon final, the man with the beard beside him, the tall, skinny man with the beard, is actually Christian Brassington. And interestingly enough, they just cut from a shot of the guy who played Federer, I can't remember his surname. Chilich, yes. They just cut from a shot of Chilich's foot being fixed, with the blood and the toes, and it went straight up to Christian Brassington in the stands, and the episode hadn't aired yet, and I literally just said to myself, talk about clever scheduling, BBC.
Actually, David Tennant, so they're obviously very good friends, David Tennant and Christian Brassington. I think because of that, David Tennant has become a fan of Poldark. John Hollingworth told me that.
There you
Celebrity
go.
fan. What do you think about a David Tennant guest
cameo?
Role? I think the internet would break.
Oh, I think it would as well. Very quickly nipping back to Christian Brassington, just as a subset of can Drake and Morwenna find their happy ending, what's going to happen about Rowella's baby? Will the truth out? That's a question I'm interested in.
Like I said, that little piece of paper can definitely be rewritten. Yeah, I'd quite like to see the carpet ripped from under smug Osborne Whitworth, because I feel like he has a pretty good life right now, and as we can see, he definitely doesn't deserve it. I feel like it would be so satisfying.
I hesitate to say he's a great character, because obviously his character is not a nice man. Nothing of what he does can be described as great. But I think Christian Brassington's done a very, very good job at making somebody utterly repulsive. So, massive props to him on that.
In dramatic terms, there've been a load of really good cast introductions this series. I think he has been one of the best, because he plays it so odiously. He is such a monster. And actually, taking a storyline that, to me, the Drake and Morwenna storyline, I know they're very popular, so it's not going to be a popular view. I found it a bit much in the whole lead up with their romance, but having then introduced someone as horrible as Osborne Whitworth, that kind of slightly too sickly sweet Drake and Morwenna romance was sort of turned on its head, and you find yourself really rooting for them. I'm now really rooting for them, and that is thanks to Osborne Whitworth.
Team Drowenna. No, Drowenna, what?
Or Mrake.
Mrake, yes, okay, I like that one. We mentioned that obviously Christian Brassington Osborne was a great addition to the series. Now we want to know about possible returns. So our question number 4, will Judd return to Poldark?
My hunch is no, actually.
Same.
I mean, Judd and Prudie were such a mainstay of the first two series, but you can definitely see that they're trying to pair up Tholly and Prudie.
Yeah.
There's that scene at the start of the
Great
series
scene.
finale where they're just hanging out together on the side of the cliff, and you're like, oh, do you do this often?
And I don't think, like, I mean, there's been brief mention of him at the start of the series. Prudie's like, oh, I miss him like a sore, or something like that. And she hasn't pined for him at all. Like, there's not been any mention of him, which kind of does lead me to believe that, you know, we're essentially being weaned off Judd and weaned on to Tholly instead.
And actually, Judd actor Phil Davis cropped up in Riviera. I
And
feel like he's
been doing the voiceovers on Who Do You Think You Are this series as
Exactly.
well, so he's busy elsewhere.
Yeah, so I'll be intrigued. I mean, I know that one of our writers, Ben Dowell, is still pining for Judd, even if Prudie isn't. So we'll see. Another character that I will definitely pine for if he doesn't return is Jeffrey Charles.
Oh my God.
As we've made very
Harry
clear on
Marcus.
this podcast, we are big fans
We
of
bow
Jeffrey
down.
Charles
We are not worthy.
and his sassy one-liners. I hope he's back.
Yeah, I did feel in the last episode, I think we discussed this a little bit previously, that he wasn't quite as sassy, that school has made him quite the gentleman, but he still has it. He's still got the edge.
I think he should come back from Harry. I think Harry's loss will be our gain.
Yeah. And in Jeffrey Charles's home, Trenwith, which of course the future of seemed a little bit on the edge, whether George would sell it or not if he remained in London, we want to know, will George ever discover the truth about Valentine? That is our fifth and final question.
Again, this is an interesting one because that scene seemed pretty definitive, you know. She, with her kind of, when she called him out on why he was behaving weird and sort of, you know, threatened to leave, she broke him, didn't she? You saw, you know, a sobbing, repentant George, which we haven't seen all series. No. She seemed to, you know, assuage any doubt in his mind about the parentage of this baby that was born with hair and nails, supposedly at 8 months. But this is a drama, and I feel like having this enormous secret bubbling beneath the surface that could implode two separate families, surely they're not going to service that at some point. Like, sure, they are going to service that at some point. You can't ignore that, can you?
No, and I mean, Ross has been offering suggestions of, you know, Elizabeth having another baby and trying to have it premature. You know, there's still some loose ends there, and I don't think the question has been quite neatly tied up just
I feel like when this little kid grows up to look more and more like Ross and less like George.
I mean, when the scar shows up on his face. I think we're going to have an interesting and dramatic Series 4. But until it airs, that's it from us on the Poldark Podcast special.
Can you believe it? We're done.
What are we going to do on Sunday nights
for another year? I know. Well, what do you think, Sarah? I mean, couldn't you wait another year?
I mean, yeah, but I mean, Susanna, we watch a lot of good drama, don't we? And last year, while Poldark was on, Victoria was up against it. And that made life very hard for people who loved both dramas. I mean, you could put one on +1 and whatever, but imagine if we'd been trying to talk about both at the same time. Imagine how long people would have been forced to listen to us for each week. And, you know, that's not going to happen this year because they're going to air at different times. And, I mean, I don't know if you're, like, busy in a couple of weeks, but I quite like doing series previews on podcasts.
Should we do a Victoria preview?
Do you know what? I think maybe we should.
I think it's coming back this autumn.
I think it is. I think it might just be a few weeks away. We're not sure. We don't know when it's going to air. But, I mean, autumn's not far off. Let's not mention because it's still summer. And I think we might have to do a preview. So you might just have to keep an eye on radiotimes.com because we might just be back. But until then, I've been Sarah.
I've been Susanna.
And this has been the Radio Times Poldark Podcast. Thanks for listening. Oh, wait, before you go, we've got some people who want to say goodbye.
Hi, I'm John Hollingworth. I play Captain Ross.
I'm Harry Marcus. I play Jeffrey Charles in Poldark.
Hi, I'm Elise Chappell. I play Morwenna, and you've been listening to the Radio Times Poldark Podcast.